Good evening, everybody. It's such a pleasure to go to this event today called the Volvo Art Session. I have a few meetings scheduled there to interview people who have a clear opinion about the future of driving. I would like to share that with you and also educate myself about what the top people at Volvo and people who come to this event think of the future of driving. So stay tuned with me today. So to start off, let me start with my thoughts and my interpretation of what it looks like in a couple of years from now. So I think there are two trends. Number one, shared economy. So I don't think people will actually own their own cars anymore. Maybe us in the neighborhood, we have a couple of cars, or a building has a car, or Uber has the cars and we rent it from them. And the second one is autonomous driving. So probably the cars are not going to have drivers anymore. So I just get into a car and I can drive from A to B. I think that's basically it. So I think it will definitely reduce the amount of cars and it will increase the flexibility we have by also giving us a chance to save money on actually buying a car that is standing around most of the time. So today we're here at the Volvo Art Session and I'm very excited to be here and try to understand where mobility, where car and car sharing is going in the next few years.
There's a few topics where everybody's talking about, which is obviously self-driving cars, it's electric vehicles, and it's going to be one of the developments that we're going to see, which we say that early 2020 is going to happen. So meaning that the first cars are ready to drive autonomously.
What autonomous drive is going to bring is a lot of probably more the robo-taxi concept. People will be able to move around in a vehicle that operates somewhat like a taxi.
But I would say it's much more diverse, something like an ecosystem. So a systemic mobility that is more efficient, as expected, will be more sustainable by combining the different elements of mobility. Maybe three directions there are, like autonomous driving, connected car, electrification, and maybe the ownership thing.
We're in that now and we're starting to see it. We're starting to see it in parts of the world. We're starting to see it in the US where they're doing some prototypes and they're doing some projects in Arizona and in Philadelphia and in California. I think we're just going to see more of that happening.
First of all, to get these cars on the roads, we need to solve regulatory issues. Second question is insurance policies. It's not really clear what happens when there's an accident. So there needs to be the business models built around that. And that's not moving as fast as technology might be. Autonomous driving cars is really pushed by the industry, is wanted by certain states. The goal is that it makes driving safer. And if that's not the case, then it should never be allowed. That the question of who is responsible for the car once it's driving autonomously, that this question is clear. And we, Volvo, said we are responsible as soon when the car drives autonomously. And then, yeah, maybe public acceptance. But I mean, in the beginning, it will anyhow be a mixture between cars that are driving autonomously and normal cars.
We did some testing with Volvo with some families with some autonomous drive. For us, the human part is really important. That's part of the DNA of Volvos. We found people really susceptible to accept the technology. We found people kind of really starting to relax and lean back and say, okay, this works for me. But I don't think the step of folks being entirely ready to, maybe get all the way in the back seat of the car and open a book and totally disconnect, because we're just not there yet either from a technology perspective.
Cars will be built that they can survive on their own, you could say. You don't need that much infrastructure around. Once they go autonomous, they have to be surviving on their own with redundant systems and stuff like airplanes, Looking at mobility in the next years, I think we need to look to China. Because there we have a very strong will from the government to push these developments through. They're going to have regulatory requirements to bring electric vehicles on the streets, and the car manufacturers that don't deliver a ratio, they will have to pay a fine.
It's a different situation in maybe Phoenix, Arizona, where they've started with autonomous drive, where it's a city that's built new in a grid-like structure, as opposed to Paris or as opposed to Beijing. And there you might see that regulation could require a much higher degree of autonomous drive in terms terms of sophistication than we might have where we start testing in other places. So I don't necessarily see it as a hindrance. I just see it as a way to take certain different steps in order to get to the desired outcome.
And Chinese motor companies with electric vehicles, they have a large market to scale. They have the government that will back them up. So this is the place where I would look if I want to look for radically new solutions that allow new kinds of mobility.
Just yesterday, we launched a new concept car showing how a car would look like, mainly also on the inside when it's fully autonomous. And one of the questions that Volvo raised, I haven't seen it before, is that cars, for instance, could replace airplanes on short distances. So that you could really go to Milano or whatever and go from Zurich to Milano and then sleep in your car. And that will be a much nicer experience than going by airplane. So the question is, how will cities look like? How can you improve city life with cars that are not loud, that are electric, that go charge themselves, that are not just parked all over the place, and that are driving people from A to B in a more coordinated and secure way. So there will be an impact, and we believe in a positive impact on society and humans.
What we've seen, I think, happen in the past 5 years or so has been more than what we saw in the last 100 years. It just depends on how quickly things move along. Here we start talking about things that initially sound far out when you hear a lot of a fully autonomous drive society, when you hear about flying taxis, and when you hear about just mobility being in entirely different facets and different ways. I mean, all of it is possible. I see our streets having much less of the traffic situation, having much less of the need for parking very close to living accommodations or to retail spaces, because I think those are going to change in the future when we can drop a person off and move the vehicle away, or we can drop a person in this location and then move them in a different way, in a different type of mobility. So I think one thing we might see is less congestion, and I hope that's the case, of course.
You would need a programmer to give them this feature.
So we're wrapping up here our time at the Volvo Art Session in Zurich, and it was really exciting to see what thought leaders, really KOL, key opinion leaders at the automotive industries and the mobility industry think of the future and how they perceive the future and how they see stuff will happen in the next few years. We had here Stephan from W.I.R.E, who had a fascinating keynote just before out here, and we had Natalie, who is the general manager of Volvo Switzerland, and Sascha, who is working for brand communication, and they really have deep insights into what's going on in the industry, not just like what we see going on the streets on a day-to-day level, but also what is going on in the future and what they're currently working on. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, you learned something, and make sure to subscribe to YouTube, to Facebook, wherever you are. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope to see you in the next one. Have a great day.